Welcome to Middle School Walk and Talk, a podcast series offering heart, hope, and health to members of our middle school communities. Hosts Phyllis Fagel and Jessica McGuire talk all things self-care, student well-being, school culture, and more. Middle School Walk and Talk is designed to support the concepts found in the Successful Middle School, This We Believe, and is a production of the Association for Middle Level Education. To learn more, visit AMLE.org. Today's episode, Creating Neurodiversity Affirming Schools, with guest Emily Kircher-Morris.
Hi, welcome to AMLE's Walk and Talk podcast. This is Phyllis Fagel. I'm here with Jessica McGuire and my friend Emily Kircher-Morris, who I have spoken to so many times, but I'm meeting in person for the first time, and you're all going to learn so much from her today. Emily is a former educator. She's a licensed professional counselor. She has a great podcast called the Neurodiversity Podcast. She has multiple books, and the most recent one is Neurodiversity Affirming Schools, Transforming Practices so all students feel accepted and supported, which she wrote with another friend, Amanda Morin, who also has done great work and is worth checking out. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm so excited to chat with you.
Well, there are so many things that I want to talk to you about. For those who are unfamiliar with Emily's work, she writes a lot about giftedness. Mm-hmm. She writes a lot about neurodiversity affirming classrooms. And I thought we could start there. First, a lot of people I've learned don't even understand the terminology. Mm-hmm. They may not have heard the word twice exceptional. Mm-hmm. They may not know what falls under the umbrella of neurodiversity. Can you just lay the framework for the conversation?
Yeah, so when I started in education, I taught in the gen ed classroom, but then I taught out also in gifted and talented programs, which is kind of was the first kind of way that I stepped into working with neurodivergent learners. But what I realized is there was a lot of overlapping between that cognitive giftedness and other labels. So like ADHD, like autism, like anxiety, like lots of these other things that were also going on. And so then that kind of broadened my scope beyond just those gifted and 2E learners. And so, but really what we're talking about when we're talking about neurodivergence in the classroom, depending on who you ask, there are kind of a couple of different definitions. Amanda and I were very intentional about how we defined it for our book. So specifically, we were relatively limited, and we looked at it as labels or diagnoses, but whether that's a medical diagnosis or an educational identification of things that are pervasive, like they're going to last throughout the lifetime, they're going to impact how somebody learns, how they communicate, how they think, how they show up in the world. And so that would include things like I mentioned, like autism, formerly Asperger's, we don't use that label anymore, they're all kind of rolled into one spectrum. ADHD, if you're going to say cognitive giftedness, then also of course intellectual disabilities, like two ends of that bell curve there, specific learning disabilities, so difficulties with reading, math, and writing, those all kind of fit there. But we were exclusive to some labels that I would consider more like mental health or psychological diagnoses, like anxiety or depression, simply because you treat them differently. So the example I always give is when I have a student or a client who comes into my office and they're dealing with anxiety, my goal is to make that anxiety go away. I want to treat it. It's episodic. We can use therapy or meds or whatever, and hopefully we can eliminate that anxiety. It's tricky because we talk about accommodations a lot with neurodiversity affirming practices, but if you accommodate anxiety too much in the wrong way, you actually make the anxiety worse.
You enable it.
Right, exactly. So when we think about neurodiversity affirming practices for those other labels, when I have a client who comes to my office and they're autistic, my goal is not to make the autism go away, is to help them navigate the world in a way, recognize that they need some strategies and some tools because the world was not created for the way that they show up. And so that's what I mean by being affirming. It's like, we know that this is how your brain is wired. We're going to help you navigate this in a way that works for you and and honors who you are, without necessarily trying to change you and make you quote unquote normal. Because what is normal? There's no such thing, right?
Right.
All kids are weird.
Yes, that's right. That's right. My shirt that I'll wear tomorrow says a little weird is good, because that is the case. It's like we want that uniqueness. We want those, however people show up is good.
So in that classroom setting, you have, let's say, 10 different situations, 10 different sets of accommodations. You have maybe some best practices that are going to be supportive of everybody. What would you put on that list?
Yeah. Well, I think kind of one of the foundational pieces is just recognizing that what is good for neurodivergent kids is good for all kids. Many of the things that we talk about with neurodiversity affirming practices closely align with like universal design for learning. Mm-hmm. And so thinking about the systems that we can put into place. So I think one of the biggest kind of questions for people to ask themselves is when you are considering accommodations for neurodivergent learners, you always want to boil it down specifically to what am I actually trying to assess or measure on any particular task? Where does this tie in with the curricular standards, with the objectives that we're trying to do? Sometimes people will get really caught up in the way things have always been done and feel like, no, it has to be done this way because this is what everybody else does. Yeah. And so I think just that mindset of questioning when and where to make those accommodations and recognizing, so like one example, a lot of times when we talk about neurodivergent kids, we talk about eye contact with autistic students, right? And I just want to be really clear. Not everybody who struggles with eye contact is autistic, and there are many autistic people who don't struggle with eye contact. So just so we're on the same page with that. Okay. But oftentimes there's this idea like you have to make eye contact. Like making eye contact is how I know that you're paying attention to me. And the thing to remember is like that's what we observe externally. That is not anything about what's happening internally for a student. Mm-hmm. And so is it really necessary for somebody to make eye contact in a classroom setting? Like who is that about? Is that about us or is that about them? Yeah. And so helping kids learn to self-advocate, like it's actually much easier for me to focus on what you're saying when I'm looking at the floor rather than looking at your face. And recognizing for that student, there might be times when they do want to fake making eye contact, but that shouldn't be the expectation, or they shouldn't be taught like that's what you have to do, because that's just based on societal standards that aren't actually best about what helps somebody learn.
And then they're using their energy to please the teacher instead of...
Absolutely. I had a client one time who had just gotten an autism diagnosis. We kind of talked about it a lot, and I said we were going through all the different traits and talking about what that meant. And I mentioned eye contact, and I go, but I don't really notice that you struggle with that too much. And she said, oh no, let me just tell you that when we're having a conversation, I am constantly thinking, okay, make eye contact.
She was very intentional about doing it.
Okay, now look away. And I just think about running that program in your mind, taking up bandwidth about when and where am I making eye contact? How am I doing that? Like when you're just trying to learn and focus, like it makes it so much more difficult than it needs to be.
So a question I get a lot, with my counselor hat from other counselors and even administrators is we have a couple of students in the grade who are visibly neurodiverse in the way they behave, in the way they interact, and other kids aren't kind, or sometimes they're unkind and that person who's the target of that doesn't even know because
they don't pick up on it.
They don't pick up on it.
Or they think it is a positive social interaction when actually it's not.
Exactly. And the question is, how can we help the rest of the grade understand neurodiversity and also be kind and inclusive and all of these things that are particularly hard in middle school when somebody could be a social liability when they're different in some way. How do you go about that?
Yeah, it's definitely a systemic process that we really need to focus on, and normalizing those differences, normalizing that equity that comes with everybody gets what they need, and we can do that starting at a very young age. But at middle school, obviously, I feel like that's when a lot of those things get heightened. Like a lot of neurodivergence comes to the surface at that middle school age because that's when the expectations for managing those things, both independence, like an executive functioning, but also social skills, like that really, really becomes difficult to navigate. I think one of the pieces that educators can really do, I can think of two specific things. The first one is making sure that we are not treating neurodivergent traits as discipline issues, because that really sets kids apart. And so the student who is, like making some noises or or they're distracted or whatever, how do we guide them and support them in an affirming way that helps them but doesn't set them apart from their peers, doesn't call them out in front of their peers? And there are a lot of things I feel like that we view that again as like, oh, well, if we give a consequence, then they're going to learn, but we haven't actually like helped whatever that is. Right. The second piece is something that I've been thinking about quite a lot, especially at the middle school and high school level. So you know how in elementary school, especially in the lower grades, like you walk into a classroom and every student has a job. Every student, like you have the line leader and the paper passer outer and like all of these, whatever those roles are.
The whole system.
Yes. Yeah. So when we talk about a sense of belonging, Brené Brown has this quote where she talks about the difference between fitting in and belonging. Fitting in is about changing yourself to fit in with a group of people that maybe don't really understand or accept you. Mm-hmm. Belonging is showing up as you are. Mm-hmm. But what the research shows about belonging is that the number one ingredient for belonging is feeling like you're contributing to a community. Mm-hmm. How do we set the stage so that if we're doing group work, we make sure that even those kids who maybe that's not so easy for know exactly what their role is. If they need some accommodations, we're giving them some processing speed time, I don't know, whatever it might be, but that we're setting them up to feel like they're contributing, and so that the other kids are then also accepting them within that environment. And so I don't know exactly what that is. I just know that as kids get older, those opportunities to contribute to a community get less and less. They become more exclusive. You have to apply for it. You have to be selected for it. You have to get all of these other things. And I feel like the neurodivergent kids are often the kids getting left out of that. So those are some of the things that I think about as far as what we do as educators to normalize those differences and help create a community where everyone shows up as they are, and then those other kids follow that lead.
I think as you get older, as a student, like the way that you see yourself contribute to the culture of your student culture, or the way other people see you contribute, becomes more solidified, right? Like over time. I come from a pretty small community, so we don't have feeder schools into our middle school. Our middle schoolers have been together, if you lived in our town, which
forever.
Many of them have since kindergarten. And so we were talking about this the other day, about how just school culture-wise, it's kind of solidified in ways because we don't have feeder schools into our middle school. And so they just have this preconceived notion that
it's hard to everybody,
you don't. You don't have a fresh start. Like
Yep.
I talk to kids in my office and they're like, and I will ask a question like, when do you think that this started? When did you start to realize you were having a problem with this person? 3rd grade on the playground.
Yeah, right.
Okay, we're in 7th grade. Like that's a real thing. So I just think it becomes solidified how you contribute to the belonging of the place. And so what can we do then as adults, if we're in that situation, or even in my classroom culture, just in that small way, as the teacher, how can what's like a practical thing I can do then to help change that, to make those lines more blurred and not so solidified, so everybody can have a place?
I think it comes with just some intentionality for planning, like how kids are going to interact. So like when we're doing, whether it's group work for classwork or whether it's some other type of activity, I know a lot of neurodivergent kids really struggle with like I had a client one time and she hated it when the teachers would say, okay, get a group together and work on this particular thing. And she really struggled with approaching kids to asking, like, can I participate? Can I be part of your group? And no one was ever reaching out to her and inviting her in. And so her strategy was she would leave the classroom and go to the bathroom and wait about 5 to 10 minutes. And then she would come back and then the teacher would have no choice but to place her in a group. But how do we get some feedback for students about how do they prefer to be placed in groups? Like, what are the things that they need to be successful? So having some communication with students, but then being intentional again about how am I fostering this and switching it up a little bit. So kids are getting experiences with other students, like so that they're not always just working or talking to the same peers over and over. Because you're right, when it's that small ecosystem, those roles become very ingrained. And so trying to think about how to break that up a little bit is tricky.
And maybe setting them up for success so that you are breaking up the project in a way that you're assigning the specific role to that student that you know they can handle.
Yeah, that is a
And
strength of
won't
theirs.
embarrass
Yeah.
themselves in front of the others.
Or another thing I think about is like so many neurodivergent kids have areas of strength or skills or interests that their peers might not even know about.
Correct.
Is there a way that we can offer them an opportunity to show that side of themselves in a way that feels really authentic and welcoming, you know, in a way that like, oh my gosh, this person knows so much about whatever it might be, and just really valuing that people show up with different sides of themselves, and all of that is good. And so highlighting that a little bit and showing the other kids how much you value it, modeling that so that they feel welcome.
And I would say, for going back to this idea of a small community, you know, I spent a long time in K-8 where the kids grew up together, and again, hard to reinvent yourself, but on the other hand, they were so accepting of one another because they just knew, well, you know, X person, this is what they have to do before they walk through the door, or this kid only likes to talk about who's the highest paid baseball player, and will not change the topic, but we love them because we've been with them forever, and they might joke around.
That's what they're going
yes,
to
and if they were to, let's say, play another team in a sporting event and the other team picked on their classmate, they would be the first to defend. And it's almost like a sibling relationship.
Yes.
There's a pro-con situation to that.
There is.
Yeah,
You're very
it's
right.
definitely true. Right.
Well, one of the questions we've been asking everybody that comes on this podcast is if you could share your one favorite strategy that's practical, concrete, that you don't have to have any specialized knowledge to implement, what would you suggest that the educators listening try in their own schools and settings?
So, okay, this is kind of specific, but it's very actionable, right? So when we have kids who are struggling with executive functioning, like a lot of neurodivergent kids do, many times they struggle with organizational skills. And so what I find is one of the mistakes that we often make when we're helping kids get organized about things is we make our organizational systems way too complex. And the thing is for neurodivergent kids, you get that little bit of novelty. It's like, ooh, a color-coded binder with all these different folders. Like, it's very exciting. They will be very enthusiastic about it. The problem is many of them can't follow through. How do we simplify it? How do we make it easier, like, to make sure that you're getting things turned in? So I know my own senior in high school, my son is you know, he was a sixth grader when it was COVID, right? And all of a sudden everything was online. We are still working on learning to hit the submit button on the on the assignments. But what are the simplest ways to do this? So rather than with some kids, if they do have paper, pencil stuff and they've got folders, it's instead of having multiple folders for multiple classes, one folder where everything goes and it's to do, done. Try to make it simpler to recognize that the maintenance of some of those strategies that we put in place that might work with a lot of kids are just overwhelming, and we need to break it down. We need to scaffold it, and so offering the supports. But the thing about scaffolding also to remember is we build it up to give the support, but then as kids grow and they mature, then we gradually take it away. Yeah.
I love that. That's actually a great piece of advice, because I don't think I've ever seen a middle school that hasn't attempted to impose some kind of organizational system.
Yeah.
On
And they're
students.
often just way too complicated.
And it's just not simple.
Yeah.
And even I sometimes don't understand the due date, deadline, whatever it is that they're dividing it all up into doing. So that makes a lot of sense to me, and is a new way of thinking about it. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
And thank you for joining us.
Yes,
on
thank
this
you for the
moment.
invitation. This
It
is
was
awesome.
Really great.
Yeah.
Where can listeners find more of your work and find you?
Yeah, so anywhere, if you listen to this podcast, you can find our podcast anywhere. It's called the Neurodiversity Podcast. If you want to learn more about the books you're speaking, so you can go to neurodiversitypodcast.com, or all of my books are on Amazon. So Neurodiversity, Affirming Schools, Transforming Practices so all students feel accepted and supported. And then my other book that's focused on education is Teaching Twice Exceptional Learners in Today's Classroom. So definitely check those things out.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.